Vedji, please start.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Good evening, students. Good evening, everyone. Today, my topic is qualitative research in psychology. Now, it's very important to understand first. I guess I have talked about this before as well, but yes, I'll repeat again. What is qualitative research? It's a kind of a scientific research that tries to bridge the gap of incomplete information, systematic collects evidence, produces findings, and thereby seeks answers to a problem or question. Now, qualitative research, there are two methods. One is the qualitative, and the other one is the quantitative. Qualitative, on one hand, is a research method where we try to fill up the gaps. For example, you're doing a research. There are two kinds of research. One is your empirical research, and the other one is your theoretical research. Now when you're doing a empirical investigation or when you're doing a theoretical research, you always need to do review of literature of the variables that you're trying to study. So sometimes what happens is when you're looking into the studies related to your topic, you come across various researches where you think that yes, something should be added, a variable should be added, this research should have been done in this way, or something should have been added, some sample should be changed, sample should be this particular kind of a study should be done on this sample. So what you're trying to do actually is you are trying to filling up the gaps which you think probably could have been the best option of doing a particular research. So you do it in a very scientific way when you're doing a research, especially when we talk about the qualitative research. It, as I said before, it tries to fill up the gaps, and those gaps are nothing but because when you're looking to the review of literature of a particular variable, you come across situations or you come across studies where you think that yes, something should have been done, some variables should have been added, or sample should have been different, or the sampling technique should have been different. And it is a systematic, the data that you collect is very systematically in qualitative research. Obviously not just in qualitative but in quantitative as well. The kind of sampling that you do or the research that you do is always in a very systematic way, produces findings, and thereby seek answer to a problem or a question. Every research that we do, they all look into solving the problems that we are looking into, which means we look into the hypothesis and then accordingly we look into the solutions, whether the research fulfills those criteria of doing the research or not, by answering the questions or by answering to the hypothesis that we have made. Now there are different types of qualitative research. Excuse me, please. um, there are some types of qualitative research which are mentioned in your book. The first is a case study. I guess we talked about the case study the other day as well. Case study is an in-depth kind of a study where you study a particular individual, one particular individual at a time, but only the thing is you do an in-depth study. That is called a case study. As the word says, case study, you study only one particular individual and at one particular time. Next is ethnography. Ethnography is again a topic which will be coming ahead. Ethnography is a kind of a type of qualitative research where we try to study culture. My research could be where I'm trying to study just one culture, or doing a comparative study among different cultures in India, or probably where I'm doing my research consisting of cultures across the globe. So it's entirely upon the researcher what actually they are trying to study. But yes, when we study the culture, it's the ethnography that we try to study the um, that we try to study under ethnography. Next is historical method. Under historical method, as the word say, historical method, we try to study the historical monuments. We try to study what happened, why it happened, what made it to happen. So every component where we try to study by examining when, how, why, all those particular answers that we try to find out, we do it through the historical method. Next is grounded theory. Now, grounded theory, as the word says, is a kind of a theory where, especially the example can be the theories that has already been built, theories that has already been developed, but you try to change it, or you try to re-examine that particular, or you try to re-investigate that particular theory according to the current time. So what happens is, grounded theory, as the word says, there is already a theory that exists, but according to time you think that the change needs to be done. You think that, according to this theory, it does not exist anymore in the present situation, and you try to mold it, you try to change it. That is the grounded theory. Now, next is types of it. Next is the ethnographic, the meaning. The method of ethnography, we also called ethnography as the ethnomethodology. Now, what is methodology? Ethno means the culture. Methodology means how you gonna study people, what kind of strategy, sampling strategy, or what kind of research you would be employing, what kind of statistical tools you would be employing, what kind of a research design you would be using. So in order to study all that particular phenomena by studying the culture, that is what is called the ethnomethodology. Now, this type of research, it is basically intends to study the culture through close observation and active participation. Now, what happens at times when you're doing the ethnography, you study the culture, and you try to study the culture, and also you try to learn the culture. And when you try to learn the culture, you get into the culture. When you say you get into the culture, is you try to talk to the people, you try to see what people thinks, how do they think, and what kind of thought process is carrying out, and what kind of traditions, values, moral values do they carry with themselves. So as a whole, you try to study the cultural aspects of the people, either by comparing different cultures, or by yes, by comparing, or just by reading, or just by studying a particular culture. So it depends upon the researcher to researcher what kind of methodology are they trying to employ while studying the cultural aspects. Now, assumptions in ethnography, is the first is that it assumes the main objective of the research depends upon and is affected by the interpretation of community cultural understandings. When you try to study the cultural aspect, the first assumption in ethnography talks about that. For example, if you are trying to study the culture, you are trying to talk to the people, you're trying to study the what are the norms, the values do the people carry in a particular culture. Therefore, what happens is your interpretation can be very subjective in nature. Your interpretation of the community can be very subjective. For example, people into one region, or for example, the thought of the people changes from 1 kilometer, and then when you travel to another 10 kilometers, the thought process is gonna change. So it's very, very tedious work when you are doing the ethnographical research assumptions. The second is, it also assumes that it is very important as well as difficult to identify the target community that required to be studied by the researcher. For example, if I'm trying to study the north part of India, as a researcher, I want to study what actually people think, how do they what are their cultural beliefs and values. So what I'll do is, it's very difficult, that what kind of people do I put up. Is it just the Chandigarh that I'm trying to study, or is it across Punjab? So it becomes very difficult to select the sample to be studied under the ethnography. Because if I say, if I have to study a Punjab, then how is it possible that I can select a the sample, who gonna be the part of my study, the participants of my study? Because if I study Punjab, every city in the Punjab would have people who belongs to Punjab. So sometimes it becomes very difficult for the researcher to identify the sample. Next is ethnography. Further assumes that the researcher is an expert and is thorough with the norms of the culture. It is very, very important as a researcher, when you try to go out and try to study the culture of the people that you don't know. It's very important to first read out what are the cultural norms of that particular area, because sometimes the body language is different when you move from one state to another, or when you move to when you go from one culture to another culture. There are certain body languages, there are certain gestures that means differently. So it's very important to understand those components as well. uh Hope I'm clear till here. Just say yes if it's clear till here. I'll move ahead. Now, next is the types of ethnographic research. Now, what are the different types of ethnographic research? First is the macro ethnography and micro ethnography. Now, for example, macro, under macro, as the word say, macro is a it's a larger kind of a perspective where I'm trying to study the culture at a larger level. Micro, on the other hand, is when I'm trying to study the culture in a very in a very specified, or when I'm trying to study culture at a smaller level, is what is micro ethnography. Next is emic perspective and etic perspective. As macro and micro are opposite to each other, the emic and the etic perspective is also they are opposite to each other. Under emic, we try to study the in group. For example, if I'm going to study the culture, if I'm going to study the culture, so the people who I'm trying to study, or the culture that I'm trying to study, the people who belongs to that particular culture are the in groups. They becomes the emic perspective. Or, for example, the other perspective, which is etic, is it is based upon the out group people. Out group, what does out group mean? For example, if I have to study the north culture, some people from the east or west or south would come up and wanted to be a part of the research that is being done on the North India. So that is the etic perspective, that becomes the outgroup, the people from the outer or the culture which they don't belong to as a research, so they come and join in, becomes the etic perspective. No, now the steps of ethnographic method: selection. I won't go much into it, deep into it. Review of literature, identification of variables. It's again, for any research that we do, any kind of research that we do, be it a qualitative research or a quantitative research, it's very important, to identify the variables that I'm trying to study, because until unless you don't know the variable, you won't go ahead. So understanding of the variables is very important, and that is the foremost condition of making any synopsis for the research or making up any research mind. Next is your cultural emotions, which is known as, I have to study the cultural norms, as I said before as well. It's very important that you understand the culture without just jumping into the research work, because and as the body languages for some of the cultural norms, they are very different. So it's very important to understand them first. Next is your data collection, and then the development of the theory. Now, um, there are some ethical guidelines for qualitative research. The first is that the respondent and their responses should be respected by the researcher. When you are doing a research, as a researcher, whatever the responses the respondent are making, you cannot make a fun out of it. You need to respect every participant's responses, whatever their response they put. The researcher must show respect to the community, or yes, to the participants of that particular community, because you cannot laugh on them. You cannot you cannot ask them for anything. You cannot, as a researcher, you need to respect every participant of that particular community. The respondent must be aware of what is being analyzed by the researcher. It's extremely very important when you do a research, be it a qualitative or a qualitative. The respondents should know what kind of research are you doing, why are you doing, and what are you trying to looking into through the researcher. And yes, it's very important that they should know. The researcher should be aware of the expected risk uh, and benefits, including the psychological and social aspects while performing the research. It's very important that when you're doing research, it should not harm any individual. It should not harm anyone. You should be, as a researcher, one should be aware what the risk can be when we are doing the research. For example, if you're doing the experimental research, the researcher should know what risk it can, the researcher or the respondents, what risk can they come through. There can be a possibility of getting into the risk, getting into the trouble. So the researcher should be well aware of those risks and the benefits, which are psychological in nature, and it should not harm anyone. Now, next is the next unit 2 is about the grounded theory. Now, what is grounded theory? It is basically a qualitative and a quantitative research method. Now, grounded theory, what is grounded theory? Grounded theory means a theory which is already existing, but according to time or situation, you think that the theory does not exist for the present situation or scenario or the time, and therefore you try to re-investigate that particular theory. That is what is grounded theory. As the word say, grounded theory means, you already have a theory, but because of the time gap of the theory that has already been there, you try to change it, and therefore that is what is termed as grounded theory. For example, a theory which was developed in 1970, and you think it is not relevant, it does not play a relevant role now in the present scenario, therefore you try to change it. You try to change it, you try to reinvestigate it, that does it follow any such things at the present time? If yes, you go ahead. If no, then yes, you make the changes as per whatever the situation asked for. So that is what is called the grounded theory. Now, next is the discourse analysis. Now, discourse analysis means analyzing someone. We call discourse analysis as a content analysis as well, where the term discourse means it refers to the talk. In psychology, what happens is, it is assumed that people are helped, when they are talking to someone. So discourse analysis is also known as the content analysis. Now, for example, if you're working as a psychologist, and you a party, a respondent, or your the subject comes in, a client comes in and walks into your office, and he asks you, okay, I have this kind of a trouble. For example, I cannot concentrate on the things, I cannot prioritize the things. So therefore, this is a problem that the client comes up to you. Now, what you're going to do is, you would ask them, okay, note down what are the things that you do for the whole day. You ask them to write down what do you do every day, what work do you do every day, write down what from hour to hour, what all things that you do, so that the client is writing up, and also telling you, what actually happens with this particular person, and the person who came up to you, and you try to analyze such situations, and you try to come up with the situations, or you try to see where the problem is, so that the solutions can be come up, as um, at the initial phase as it can be. Now, um, next is analysis, definition of discourse analysis. Now, according to Hammersley in 2002, he says that it is a study of the way versions of the world, society, events, and psyche are produced in the use of the language and discourse. Now, what happens is, under discourse analysis, we try to study the society, we try to study the events that are happening. For example, as I have just said, that you ask the person that what he did for the whole day, and the person writes it down, and he comes up next time and he shows you, this is what I usually do. So you are asking the person actually the events that he or she comes across, and to analyze where the problem is and to see what can be done to improve upon it. Now, Bernard Berenson also defined content analysis as a research technique for the objective, systematic, and quantitative description of manifest content of communication. Now, what happens is, as I said before as well, that discourse analysis or the content analysis is the mixture of both qualitative and the quantitative research method. For example, you ask you are taking an interview, you are taking the case study of a person if needed, you are taking the interview of the person if needed, or you're taking the various quantitative research methods as well, based upon what the responses the person shows. You are interpreting it. So what kind of research, whether it as the word says, that the discourse analysis or the content analysis, it uses both, it comprises of both descriptive as qualitative as well as the quantitative research method. Therefore, it's a very systematic way of coming up with someone's behavioral problems, someone's problems just because of marriage, someone's problem just because of maladjustment in the life. So you come up in a very objective, in a very systematic way, because you do it in a very systematic way, and therefore you come up also with quantitative description, where you analyze based on the statistical analysis that you do upon the analysis, upon the the responses that you get from the respondent. Now, next is the relevance or the implications, or we call it as the significance of discourse analysis. Now, it says some of the other relevance or significance of this approach is that discourse analysis enable us to understand the conditions behind a specific problem. If you're going, for example, if you do the case study under, if you do the discourse analysis in this, what happens is, for example, you try to see the problem at the in-depth level. You try to understand the conditions of the person, and then you see what can be done. Discourse analysis help in gaining a comprehensive view of the problem, and help ourselves to relate with that particular problem. It's very important when you're trying to do the discourse analysis, it is very important that you are empathetic as well. Empathetic means when you put yourself in other shoes. As a psychologist, it's very important that you empathize, so that you come down to the client's problem and then you try to solve it, because then it would help you as a psychologist to understand more and deeper into the situation. I know it's not easy, but yes, when you do it, mind me, it really helps the person to come out the problem when you yourself put yourself into that particular situation. It helps the researcher in understanding hidden motivations within ourselves and researchers as well. Motivational aspect. Motivation means which makes you to move ahead, something that motivates you. When you do as a research, when you work as a researcher, and when you use discourse analysis as the method to study the behavior of a person, it helps you to go ahead with the motivation that yes, you need to help. As a counselor, it's very important that you need to understand the person, and then you come down to the solutions of the problem, and it motivates you if the person is counseled in a healthier possible way. It helps in meaningful interpretation of people and the world. Ethnography is a process. It's a research, qualitative and quantitative research method, where the meaningful interpretation of the any research method that you use, they will come up with the interpretation of the people in the more meaningful way. Because when you do a research on someone, when you do a research um, um, on people or the events, it always comes up with the meaningful interpretation of the events or the people or the world or anything that you're trying to study. Discourse analysis can be applied to any text, that is, to any problem or situation, and requires no guidelines to be followed. It is very important when you are using the discourse analysis. It is very important that the people that you're trying to study, um, you know they should not be what you call that nothing should disturb them. They should not be targeted about anything which might hurt them. Their feelings might be hurt. So it is very important to understand those levels as well. Now, next is steps in discourse analysis. The first is the target orientation. It's very important that the target should be the sample for the study should be well off decided. What is the focus of the study? Why do you want to do the study? You should know it as a researcher. The second is significance of data. If you are doing a research, if you are using a discourse analysis on a specific reason, you should know it. What is the significance? What is the importance of taking those data from such people? For example, if you are studying someone's aggression level, or if you're trying to study someone's stress or depression level, you need to know why are you taking, and what is the significance of taking that particular data. Because anyhow, you are trying to help the person to come out or relieve out of such problems. So it's very important to understand such significance of taking that particular data. Next is interpretation of data. How do you interpret it? Do you interpret it using the qualitative, using what kind of techniques are you using to interpret the data? Somewhere are you trying to knowing and understanding people at a very larger level or in a very deep level? Next is analysis of the findings. It's very important. Once you have collected all the data, once you have interpreted it, it's very important to analyze the findings as well. What are the important findings that have come out? Probably the important ones can be which can be actually used to help the person to come out of the problem. Okay. Next is what the issues can be in terms of reliability and validity in discourse analysis. Since the method of discourse analysis it lacks a proper format or guideline, the processing of data through this approach is controversial. Sometimes it's very controversial to study such people who have different kinds of problems using discourse analysis, because sometimes what happens is you do not want to share your inner feelings, you do not want to share your personal feelings with anyone. So it's very important first to build a rapport, so that the client can be made can be brought up at the ease, and it helps for the proper collection of the data from the person that you're trying to study. Next is of interpretation of the information collected through its data is again questionable. um, the information that you're taking, or the information that the client is giving, is it reliable, it is valid information or not? As I said before as well, sometimes what happens is we do not want to share our personal feelings with others. We do not we do not feel at ease by doing so. So sometimes that particular thing becomes a questionable when we are using discourse analysis. Next is, as there is no hard data provided through discourse analysis, the reliability and validity of one's findings depends on the force and logic of one's arguments. For example, because subjectivity is a foremost thing that comes in when we are analyzing some as a researcher, when we are analyzing or interpreting the results of the people that we are trying to study. What happens at times is that the researcher's perception or the researcher's subjectivity can also act as an hindrance while doing the discourse analysis. Sometimes our own opinions can act as an hindrance towards the actual actual interpretation of the data. So personal biasness should be avoided. Next is uh, the reporting and evaluating in qualitative research. Now, it's very important how you report it, how you report. For example, you have collected the data, you got the information, you have collected every possible things that you could, and then after that, reporting is a foremost thing where you are actually putting up across all those things into your report, and evaluating all those things using the qualitative research method. Now, there are steps in evaluating or analyzing of data in the qualitative research. The first is reading the overall collected data. Whatever data you have collected, you should know it, and it is very important that you go through whatever has been provided by the client. It's very important that you read through everything so that our personal biasness as a researcher is avoided, and anything that confuses you should be asked straight away from the client. Next is categorizing the collected data. You need to figure out what is supposed to be put across when and how to go about. For example, if you think that yes, this counseling should take about 4 weeks of time or 6 weeks of time, or if you are collecting the data, it's very important to understand that what kind of things should be put across and where. Naming or labeling the categories, you need to understand that what kind of information has been collected and how it has been collected. It's very important to name such incidences, so that whatever you are trying to do should be done in a healthy way. Next is identification of the causal relationship. What causes what, what was the reason behind the problem of your client. It's very important to understand such causal factors. And then is the recording or filing the data. It's sometimes what happens is when you're taking the data, or when you are, for example, doing an interview as one of your research method. Sometimes what happens is it is very very good thing to record whatever the client is saying. Sometimes what happens is, if the client is saying something very important and our mind gets diverted, or sometimes what happens is we miss out something very important, so we record it so that we can go home back, or we can hear it again, because the recording is there, and therefore we can hear it again whenever we feel is convenient to hear again. So it's very important to record that particular data that you're trying to evaluate, or you're trying to interpret. Now, there are steps for the qualitative research. The first is the reading the overall. Okay, this is done. There are steps of preparing a report of the data in the qualitative research. First is preparation of the content of report. It's very important that you prepare the report first. You prepare what all needs to be collected, what all needs to be done, so that nothing is skipped out. So it's very important to prepare, to start up with the report making, and whatever necessary findings you think you have achieved it. It should be noted down there, and the report should be made properly. Review and discussion of the report. You need to check out every time when you are making the report that yes, the necessary conditions or the necessary information that you think was required has been put across, and it has been put up in the report itself. Next is preparing of the executive summary. It's very important that you summarize all the findings into one particular paragraph or two paragraphs, indicating that yes, whatever has been done has been recorded or has been put across into the file. Now, next is the scope of the future research. It's very important to indicate what is the future of this particular research. If you're trying to do any qualitative research or any quantitative research, obviously because we are talking about the qualitative research over here, so it's very important to understand and to know what could be the scope, what could be the scope of the research that you are doing, or at present, and what can be done in future, so that any amendments or changes can be done across for the research purpose. Next is the contents of research report. How you gonna, what should be added, what are the points that are necessary while making the research report of the qualitative research. The first is the title page. It's very important that you need to have a title which indicates what are the variables that you are trying to study, and to some extent, yes, what sample have you selected to make up your research. Second is table of contents. Table of contents should have been there. For example, if you're writing an introduction, how many pages from which page number to what page number, and every information that you have put across in the report should be put it across in the contents table as well. Next is your executive summary, summarizing your report into few words, where your aim has should be written, your sample should be written, and in few lines what analysis has been come out. So it's just a summarization of what actually you have done in the whole process of your research. Next is the purpose of the report. Why did you made it, what made you do the research, what made you do this particular kind of findings, why did you do a grounded theory, why did you do a discourse analysis, why did you do a case study, why did you pick interview. So it's very important to understand all those components, and you write up as the process purpose of the project, that what made you do this particular kind of a report, or what made you to do this particular kind of the research. Next is contextual background of the research target. What is the context to it, why did you do it, in the sense that yes, what are the implications of such project that you have carried out for the future thing. It also shows up the background of the research that you're trying to do. For example, if you have picked up any variable, what is the background towards that particular behavior, towards that particular variable, so that you come to know that what has been done and what are your aim of doing it in the present time situation. Next is methodology. Under methodology, we have few things. First is the sample. I hope you all know what sample is by now. Sample is a particular, it should be a true representative of the entire population. You select the population first, and then out of population, you select the sample. So population is the bigger aspect. And when you break that particular population into some parts, it is the sample. And then what are the scales that you are using, what are the questionnaires, what are the tools that you will be using to do the research, to take the responses of the respondent. Are those tools that you're using, are they valid tools, are they reliable tools, are those tools meant for the population that you're trying to do research on, should also be known through the norms of that particular questionnaire. I've told this to you before as well, that every psychological test or every psychological tool that you use has its own independent manual, and that manual indicates the scoring of the questionnaire, how to score it, what sample can you use that particular questionnaire, what is the reliability of that questionnaire, what is the validity of the questionnaire, what are the norms of that particular questionnaire. Everything related to the questionnaire is given into the manual. And the next is the type of data collected. What data have you collected on? Have you taken interview? If you have taken interview, have you taken structured interview, unstructured interview, or semi-structured interview? If you have used questionnaire, which kind of questionnaire have you used? How many statements were there in the questionnaire? And what questionnaire have you used? Who have constructed and developed that particular questionnaire should also be put across in this particular column. The recordings, if you have done, how many recordings have you done? What instrument have you used to record? How have you done the recording? And also observation. Have you done an observation? If yes, what kind of observation have you done? Was it a naturalistic observation, or was the observation done in the laboratory settings? So all these things should be countable to the type of data that has been collected, and how have you collected? What is the method that you have chosen to collect the data? Next is results and findings. What were the results? Now the results would be, for example, the statistics that you have used. Have you used the descriptive statistics or the inferential statistics? Under inferential statistics, have you used correlation as your tool, statistical tool, or have you used t-test, or you have used ANOVA? What kind of statistical tool have you have used to prove your hypothesis, whether the hypothesis have been proved right or the wrong? And what were your findings? Did the findings come out as per your hypothesis, or are they rejecting the hypothesis and your results are new? Next is your interpretation and conclusion. You interpret out your data. आप interpret करते हो what on the basis of your findings, and you come out with the conclusion as well. Conclusion would be your own words, where you try to see whatever the results have come. If hypotheses are proved, if hypotheses are not proved right as per your research hypothesis, what could be the reasons behind it, also comes in the conclusion part. Then is the limitation of the research of the study. Limitations would say what should have been done to improve upon the recent research. The research that you have done could have some limitations. For example, sometimes when we are doing the research, we would a thought process comes in. I should have done this way, or I should have done this way. I should have picked up this variable, or I should not have picked up this variable. So all such things can be put as the limitation of the present study. Then is your implication. Implication says that what is the practical, how can you apply this research in a practical way? What is the benefit to the society? Why is this research is this research brings any benefit to the society or not? That comes under the implication part. Next is references. It's very important to quote a reference. Even when you're writing the assignments, it's very important to write the reference part, because once you write the reference, it makes clear that yes, you have gone through such resources to complete your assignment. So same goes over here in the in the research as well. It's very important to give the reference part from reference in the sense, what all help have you taken, what all resources did you pick up, or the help from the resources have you done to make up your research. And the last one is the appendixes. For example, the questionnaires that you have used should also be put at the end. Now, next is what are the do's and don'ts in evaluating, interpreting the report in qualitative research. The first is the analyst, the do's. The analyst should be clear, specific, and describe the sample population. It's very important that the researcher needs to be very clear before actually doing the research, because if a researcher is not clear, if the researcher doesn't know what he or she is trying to do, if the researcher doesn't know what the population is, and if the researcher doesn't know what out of the population what should be the sample, then it can create a problem for the researcher. So it's very important the researcher should be clear about about the research, and also about the sample that the researcher is going to pick up. Next is the researcher should code the data for their convenience in processing the data. It's very important that the responses that you take should be scored, and they should be coded as well. Coded in the sense, for example, if you have taken the data, then you score the data, and then you either put it onto the Excel sheet, or you can even do, there is a software called SPSS. SPSS is a software on which the data can be feeded, and therefore whatever statistics you want to use, you can always do it through that particular software. Next is the analyst should frequently use diagrams, flowcharts, or matrices for conveniently summarizing and explaining the data. Sometimes what happens is, when you're reading the research, for example, a research has been published. So sometimes what happens is, I don't have much time to read all of that. So what I'll do is, I will look into the the diagrams or the flow charts that the researcher has made, so that it becomes easy for me to understand, instead of writing, instead of reading through and understanding every single word that the researcher has put. So sometimes your this graphical representation makes a more sense than writing whole of it. The next is the analyst should draw conclusion on the basis of the present study and other related study in the similar field. It's very important, as I said before as well, that when you are writing the conclusion part, it is your perspective. What you think about the present study, and also what others on the same variables have talked about. Is your theory, is your research at present, is it also saying the same thing which the other researchers has been saying, or your research is speaking about something else, or is it providing a new results other than what has been proved till now? So you need to clear it out, you need to put through the conclusion in such a way. Next is, as and when required, the analyst should develop policies for further evaluating or confirming data in order to prove their validity. It's very important, that policies should be made up, so that whatever data you are collecting should be reliable enough, should be valid enough, and whenever necessary requires, the data should always be cross checked from the researcher. Now, what are the don'ts? What the researchers should not do? The analyst should not depend fully upon the research design selected, as no research design is perfect on its own. When we do a research design, when we talk about what research, design I would be going through, whether I'll be taking up the single design, or I'll be picking up the correlational design, or will I be picking up the factorial design. It's very important some at times to select an appropriate research design, but sometimes what happens is that research design is not up to the mark. Whatever the researcher is doing, or the way the researcher is selecting the sample or picking up the sample, is not appropriate according to the research design that the researcher has selected. So it's very important that appropriate design should be picked up, so that it is justifying the research work. Next is, the analyst should not interview about only the successes. Failures can also provide significant information to them. You know, Sometimes what happens is we just take interviews. For example, if my interview consists of some people who have done something good in life, so it's very important that such people should not only just be interviewed about the success in their life, they should also be talked about what led them to success. Sometimes there are some failures that has led to someone's success. So it's very important on this perspective as well, that we need to analyze, we need to interpret, we need to know every single aspect, every single possibility, every single probability towards that particular research. The next is, analysts should not completely depend upon questionnaires. As much as of the information can only be available through observations and interviews. Now, sometimes what happens is, for example, if you talk about interview, whether you use the structured interview or semi-structured interview or the unstructured interview, sometimes because the rapport has not been built up between the respondent and the interviewer or the researcher, therefore it creates a biasness in the responses. In order that the client becomes fully aware that yes, whatever he'll say will be confidential in nature, therefore it is very important that yes, that rapport has to be built up in a healthy way, so that whatever the researcher is facing, whatever the client's problem is, or whatever the researcher is looking through the research, it should be fulfilled. The criteria of doing the research should be fulfilled. So the questionnaires should be used in a proper way. The proper the scoring should be done in a as per what the norms of the questionnaire says. The interview should be conducted in such a way that whatever questions needs to be asked should be asked in the appropriate and the healthy way. There should not be any corner left to be unanswered, or left so that the researcher again complains about the research in future, that yes, I should have done in this way. So every aspect should be covered in the healthier, best possible way, so that the analyst or the researcher is comfortable enough in doing that particular research. Okay, that's all, I guess. Any questions, please, from anyone? If someone has a problem or a question, can unmute and ask.
Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, sir. Is there any problem to anyone? Any question to anyone?
Sir, hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
हाँ जी sir. Sir, my name is Gayatri. Actually, I didn't attend your last class. Actually, I was not able to join the class somehow. I don't know, there was some issue or what was there. So, is it available, your last class? Is it available anywhere?
Yes, ma'am. The recording has been done of that particular class as well. The recordings are done for every single class, so you don't have to worry about that.
So,
You can do it from the Facebook page of the Regional Center Chandigarh.
the Facebook page. Okay, it's recorded. Okay. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
yeah. They all are recorded, ma'am. You don't have to worry. But yes, if you come across any problem, you're most welcome to question it.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Hanji, hanji. So this is my last class for this was my
So from where can we take the recording?
ma'am. Recording can be taken from the from the Facebook page of RC Chandigarh.
Yes.
So that can be done from there,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other question, please?
Yes, sir. If we'll have any problem regarding the research, this paper, so where
Yes,
should we ask, sir? So how can we contact you?
ma'am. This I don't know how to answer it, ma'am. That can be done from the regional.
विवेक जी अगर इस रिसर्च मैटर पे जब कोई कुछ समस्या आएगी तो इनके गाइड इनकी हेल्प करेंगे।
हाँ जी।
जो इनके गाइड होंगे वो इनकी हेल्प करेंगे।
Right, sir. True.
Any reference book which you would like to recommend for this?
Ma'am, Ma'am, there is a book of Singh on research methodology. You can purchase that book. A.K. Singh's book, ma'am.
Name of the book?
Ma'am, it's Test Measurements in Research. When you go to market, you can go to Punjab University market. You can ask over there for A.K. Singh's book on research methodology. You'll get it. So it's a good book to be used. Yeah. There is
Okay,
another book
thank
of
you so much.
there is another book of Kothari as well that you can purchase.
Yeah, Kothari.
Yes, ma'am. Kothari.
Kothari books are all for all the subjects. They are very helpful, no?
Sorry, ma'am.
Kothari books for all the subjects are very helpful, no?
Ma'am, I don't know about other subjects. I only know about psychology.
Okay. Well, psychology only. I'm just. Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
ओके विवेक जी, धन्यवाद आपका।
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
और वीडियो की जो लिंक्स हैं वो चैट बॉक्स में शेयर कर दिए गए हैं, वहाँ से आप उनका यूज कर सकते हैं। और आज के विषय के ऊपर तो सभी क्लासेस हो गई हैं।
हाँ जी सर, हाँ जी।
ओके, थैंक यू विवेक जी।
हाँ जी, थैंक यू सर, थैंक्स।